Okay, so first of all, I'll introduce myself and then I'll hand it over to Jeffrey and Mason. So I'm Harika. I'm working as hyperautomation consultant in Dubai with First Abu Dhabi Bank. So I have overall 10 years of experience into IT industry. And besides my professional experience, I also have a YouTube channel where I talk about a lot of updates on UiPath and the latest technologies as well. So if you're someone who wants to make up your career into UiPath, then I would say my channel is the go-to one. And yes, I'm also worked as a speaker for many UiPath community events, and I'm also recognized as the UiPath MVP for apps for the year 2024 and for IDP and AI Center for the year 2025. So this is pretty much about me. So I would like to hand over to Jeffrey and Mason before we get into the session for a quick intro. Over to you, Jeffrey.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey. I'm also in the banking field, and I've been working with UiPath for 8 years, and I'm excited to be here and help you guys and ask any questions you guys have. To you, Mason.
Yep. Hi, everyone. My name is Mason Turvey. I am an MVP, like Jeffrey and everyone else. I am just here to answer questions and help out with the chat. So looking forward to that. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Jeffrey and Mason, for the quick intro. So now let's get into the session. So today, what are there for us as a part of our agenda is I'm gonna take you through what are actually the errors and how different the exceptions when we talk about do the comparison between errors and exceptions, and what different types of exceptions are there, and basically how do we handle them. And definitely, when we are building any automation, debugging and troubleshooting is the key processes. And how do we also log in case of exceptions? So these are the quick agenda pointers that I have for today. So throughout the session, we will go through each and every agenda point in detail. And I also have covered some demos for you, because any session would not be complete without any demos, right? So I'll be sharing the demos with you as well. Throughout the session, if you have any questions, you can put it up in the chat. So Jeff and Mason will be there to help you answering your questions. So first of all, I'm going to talk about, and besides to that, we also have the series of the sessions that are going on. So we have upcoming sessions on orchestrated and automation methodology. So you can go ahead and register for the sessions as well to have your automation developer series end to end. So yes, first of all, I'm going to talk about the errors. So basically, when we talk about any kind of development, there are certain situations where we encounter the errors. So what basically we can term as errors, which, where we can actually find out these errors. So let's say, for example, you are building any automation, there can be different types of errors. So if you see on the screen, I have put down 3 different types, basically the syntax error, user errors, and the programming errors. So I would shortly take you through the studio as well to showcase you how these different types of errors can be analyzed within the studio while you're developing the automations. So firstly, when I talk about the syntax errors, so these errors, any type of error basically, whenever you're building the automation, it will not actually let you run the automation. So when let's say you have any error in your code or in your workflow, when you try to run the automation, it actually stops you from executing it. So for example, here I have the syntax error. So let me quickly showcase you how this errors looks like and how it will affect your actual functionality of the code. So I'll take you through the studio. Let me open the studio project for you. So I'm going to create a small sequence. Okay, so here I'm just simply taking an assign activity. And here I will create a small variable. Let's say, for example, I'm going to create str error just for the namesake. And then I believe most of you know about the if inline statement. If at all you don't know, I'll just give you a quick glance about how it looks like. So let's say, for example, this is how we write it. Inside the if, you write something called as condition. Okay. So if the condition is true, in such case, the first one will be executed. Otherwise, the rest of it will be executed. So let's say, for example, here I wrote something like this, and it's there shows something. So this is how we can see that there are errors. So let's say I'm going to save it irrespective of I see that there's an error. And then let's say, for example, I'm going to run this automation. Immediately it's going to show an error for me. So obviously these errors would be easily understandable as we read them. So here if you see, the condition is something which is not declared. That means it's the value of the variable is missing, right? So these are self-explanatory. Basically the type of the errors and the messages that we are seeing are self-explanatory. So you could be able to understand what actually an error is now, right? So basically, whenever there is an error, it will not let you run the automation. And that error can be different types. That can be a validation error, that can be a syntax error, or that can be any type of error. So for example, now how do I correct this? So let's say if I mention here something like if 5, or let's say if true. Okay, so what I'm mentioning here is true is basically a boolean type. So I'm mentioning if this condition is true, it's going to print true, otherwise it's going to print false. So this is basically a right statement. So that's why we have seen that there is no error. So whatever we have seen here is it can be a syntax error, right? So let's say for example I am gonna write something like this, because it has thrown an error. So now if you see, it is expecting something over here. It is expecting one more double quote, because it usually follows a certain syntax. When you're writing a condition, the the if inline statement is written in a certain way, which we call it as syntax in programmatic language, right? So if it has to be written in a certain way, and if the syntax is not followed, in such cases we encounter syntax errors, right? So how do we fix this? We can even go through the error, and if we read the error, it will be self-explanatory. So it will help us to understand why the error has come up in first place and how can we fix that error. Okay, so this is how you can fix the syntax error. So this is how the syntax errors looks like. And now if I take you through the next part, which is user errors. So what does user error basically mean? So let's say for example I'm going to create one more variable, for example. So let's say I would say str company name. Okay. So this is the variable name that I've created. And then I'm going to give a value called 5. Okay. So here, if you just observe, it's going to throw another error. So if you see, the selected value is incompatible, right? So this can be some things because you try to assign a value into any variable which is of a different type. So if anybody can guess this, right? So what could be the issue with this is basically you're trying to add an integer value into a string value. So basically, if you read this error, it's very clear and it's self-explanatory. Implicit conversion from integer to string, right? So that means you're trying to add a value which is an integer into the string, so which will not be a proper way of doing it, right? So it is actually expecting a string. So these are different types of errors that can happen, which will not let the user to execute the automation, and it will affect the actual functionality of the automation to execute and run it. Okay, now let's get into the next part, and programmatic error. So basically what a programming error is, it will not let you to stop any execution, but however the end result would be wrong. So let's say for example you are trying to club first name and last name, but if you have given a different variable. So let's take one more example to see and understand how this works. Let's say I'm going to take an assign activity now, and I'm going to create a variable called str first name, and I would just give my name. And I'm going to pull up one more variable called str last name. Okay. And then I'm going to give my last name over here. Now, let's say I wanted to concat both of this. Okay. And then I wanted to print this in a message box. Okay. So basically what I'm trying to concatenate here is str first name with a, actually I wanted to get the full name of this, right? So for example, if I'm concatenating first name and last name, it's going to give the full name. But as a programming error, if I am concatenating first name and the company name, it will not throw any error when you're executing the program. But these are called programming errors, where you give a wrong value instead of giving the correct value. So this will lead to some bugs basically, right? So it will not affect any execution, but however, the end result would be not as expected, right? So here I'm expecting my first name and the last name should be concatenated, but however, the first name and the company name got concatenated, which is wrong, right? So these are called programming errors, which will lead to incorrect results. So these are the different types of errors that you can encounter. Some of the errors will break the functionality, some of the errors will stop the execution, because before it actually runs, it's gonna compile, right? During the compiling time, the errors will be identified and it will not let the programmer to proceed further for the execution. So these are the different types of errors. Okay. So I hope this is clear. If you have any questions, you can even put it up in the chat, or we can discuss at the end as well. Okay. So these are the different types of errors, and this is how we can correct them in order to proceed further with the cool execution of the automation. Okay. And now I'm going to talk about exceptions. So what are basically the exception? So when we're talking about the exceptions, these are something which will not be encountered at the compilation time. So whenever there's an exception, you will not find it until you encountered that during the execution of the automation. Okay. So let's say, for example, you're trying to execute an automation where you want to log in into a certain application. Okay. So where you enter the username, you enter the password and click on login button. And sometimes, let's say your application's password gets expired after every 90 days. Then in such cases, you will encounter an exception, right? Because this is an scenario which will happen during the runtime itself. It is not something that you can predict, or it will not be predicted by your automation when it is compiling, right? So these are exceptions. So the scenarios which not happen usually, which cannot be compiled by your automation, but which will happen at the runtime, correct? So basically we can call them when the exceptions or the errors that happens during the runtime of your robot, or during the runtime of your automation, those are called exceptions. Okay. So how do we handle them is also a major question, which we will discuss as we proceed through the session. But however, when these exceptions are happening, we have to understand how we will handle them. First of all, let's see how we can differentiate and what are the different types of exceptions that we have. So basically, if you see on the screen, we have two different types of exceptions. The first one is system exceptions, which are called also as application exceptions, and business exceptions. So the business exceptions, we would name that as a known exceptions basically, because we will understand, or we will try to think that this scenario may happen, and we will try to mitigate that scenario. So these are called as business exceptions. Basically, we also call them as known exceptions. But system exceptions are something which we cannot predict, and it may happen during the runtime, and they are also called as application exceptions. So first of all, we'll try to see and we'll try to understand the differences between both of them clearly, and then we will try to understand how we can actually handle those exceptions in a way that your program execution will not be ended abruptly at any point of time. Okay. So now let's get into the details of system exceptions. Okay. So first of all, if you wanted to understand how you can handle these exceptions and how you can see these exceptions, so firstly I'll just show you here, maybe in the studio itself. If I just take assign activity, I will just give a variable called exception variable. Okay. And then I will show you now what are the different types of exceptions that you can have. So now here in the exception variable, I've declared it as a string. But let's see how many different types of exceptions that one can see. So now here you can see there is something called null reference exception, right? So now I will just show you. So here you can see something called a system exception, right? Which is called as an application exception as well. So you can just declare that exception as an application exception or system exception. So whenever you try to get the value when during the runtime, when this exception happens, it's gonna fetch the value of the exception and it will give you certain information about it. So like for example, which we will see during the demo. But however, to give you a high level idea about it, so this exception variable will contain the information about what is the type of the exception, like what is the message of the exception, basically why that exception has happened. It will give you a clear information about it, and most importantly where it has happened. So let's say you are executing a workflow where you are trying to click on a certain button, like in a home page or anything, and you have not even logged in has failed, right? So it will not be able to click that certain item or a button. So in such cases, the system exception will happen and it's going to give you a clear information like certain UI element is not found on the screen. So the reasons could be certain reasons, like this element is not found because it's not visible on the screen, or it's minimized, or multiple selectors are available. So it will give you certain reasons why a UI element is not available. So which we will see practically when I execute the demo. But overall it will give you certain parameters which helps you to understand why the exception has come in the first place, and what are the reasons and what is the source of the exception. Okay, so now I just to show you, I have declared this variable as an exception, right? So now let's try to understand what are the different properties of this exception. So now if you see here, I have taken exception variable, and as I have declared that variable as an exception, so you here you can see exception variable dot message. That means what is the message, what is the reason for this exception to come. Okay, so it will give you the complete message or the complete reason for the exception, so that you can utilize this to understand why the exception has come. So you can capture this value when you are running the automation. Okay, and apart from that, what else we have? Source. So if you see the source, so basically the source will show you at which activity this exception has occurred. Okay, so this will give you a clear understanding. Okay, so at the click activity within this module, this exception has happened. So this will help you to create a log. So I will also talk about logging of the exceptions, and how do you actually log them in order to understand why and where the exception has happened. Because whenever we run the automation, once after we develop and deploy, we will be publishing the automation and we will not run it from the studio, right? So I mean, you will be understanding that in depth in the next sessions, like in the orchestrator sessions. But however, to give you a clear idea, once after we build the automations in the studio, we will publish them into the orchestrator, and we will be mostly running them in unattended mode. So we will be not sitting in front and we will not be monitoring them, basically. So in such cases, to understand why certain exception has come up, you have to put up your logs. Logging is very very important to identify and troubleshoot the issues that has happened, right? So exception handling with a good logging will build a proper solution to understand. I see someone is annotating on the screen. Um, okay, fine. So I think it's clear for everybody. So now let's get into the next part and see how we can, what are the different types of exceptions and how we can handle them. Okay, fine. So let's get into this. So as I've mentioned you, there are different types of exceptions that are available. So the first one is null reference exception. So basically, this is a kind of exception let's say you're trying to work through a different variable. So basically, whenever we are trying to automate, we will definitely use variables. We prefer not to hard code the values within the automation, right? But let's say in a case where the variable has a null value, it does not have any value, if it is empty, so in such cases we will get null reference exception. So you can ask a question like, how do we handle the null reference exceptions, right? So let's say there's a data table, for example, and you're trying to put a condition on a data table where there is no value. So you will get an error like there's no value, or a particular object reference error, right? Basically, when there's no value within the data table, or null reference exception. So in order to mitigate these kind of exceptions, what you can do is you can define a default value. Let's say there's a string, okay? So you can define the default value as string.empty, something like that, right? So these will help you to mitigate the null reference exceptions, even though in a case where you're trying to do any automation where the string value is empty, it will be coming as an empty is different from null, basically, okay? So if you define the default value as string.empty, you will not be encountering the null reference exception. So these are the common type of exceptions which we may encounter, and you have to mitigate them by defining the default values. And index out of the range exception. So basically, let's say you have a collection, like for example, an array or a list or anything, or a dictionary, for example. So you wanted to execute something which is not within the range. You were trying to fetch a value of array of 1 or array of 10. Basically, if the array contains only 5 elements, and if you're trying to fetch array of 10, it will not get any value. So in such cases, you will get index out of the range. So it's very, very important to understand why certain errors are coming. So basically, let's say you are giving an I have shown you, right, how you can understand the reason of the error. You will be giving exception dot message, and if the message is thrown as index out of the range, but if you don't know what does it mean, it will be difficult for you to troubleshoot. So if you see, there are some 7 different types of exceptions that I've kept on the screen, which will help you to understand why certain exception has happened, right? So if you go to Google and search, definitely you will be able to understand, but there can be certain type of errors or exceptions which will happen very common, in a common way. So in such cases, it's good to have them a handy note of why certain type of exceptions occur or happen. So if you see, index out of the range is one such exception when you try to fetch a value which is out of the bounds, basically. So if there are array or any collection, if you're using, and if you're trying to acquire a value which is not within the range, then you will end up having index out of the range exception. And similar to that, when you're trying to do UI automation, this is the most common exception that you will find. If there is let's say, for example, as I have mentioned, you are trying to automate a website where you want to do a login into application, okay? So in such cases, if there is an expiry of the password, and if you're trying to click on a page or a certain element on an application, but for some reason, if the UI of the application got changed, or you are trying to click on a certain page which is not opened, right? So in such cases, or if basically, if you see on the definition, it says timeout period, right? So if it's not able to find the element within the timeout, so I believe you might know about the timeout, right? So how we can adjust that and everything, how we can keep a dynamic timeout and all. So in such cases, when you are doing the UI automation, selector not found exception is the most commonly encountered scenario. And we also have image operation. So similar to selector not found, if you are trying to work on any citrix or any image, in such cases, if the image is not found, then we will encounter image operation exception. Similar to that, text, right? Indicated text, if it's not found on the screen or the element, or if you're trying to do the screen scraping or web scraping, so in such cases, if the text is not found, or if you're using an element called get text or anything, if the text is not found, then you will find this text not found exception. And yes, application. So these all will fall under the application exceptions, basically the ones from 4 to 6. So you can try to see. I mean, like I would say preferably to go ahead and try, give it a try by just changing the password, so that you will encounter an issue where the login will be failed, right? So in such cases you can encounter and see how the system will work. We can also give it a try. Let me just see how I have my demo login over here. So, but the password is something which I have already given. Let me check. Okay. So this is a common password which everybody will be using for this application, right? So let's say, for example, I'm trying to do a login into this application, okay? Where the password is wrong. So it has tried to open the application, username and the password. It will click on login. Okay, so the execution has finished but it has not entered into the home page, right? So it has, because the password is wrong. So now let's say you're trying to click on something on the home page. So let me just get that flow also over here. Let me show you that. Okay. So this is the workflow that I have for the next steps, which I have created. Let me put that over here. I'm going to take only type into cache, and then so here after username and password, it's gonna click on caching. Okay. And then I'm gonna give a hard coding value over here, because as of now I don't have any row or value as such. So let me just give this value. Okay, so let me also adjust a timeout so it won't take much time for us to see the error. I'll just give 5 seconds. Okay, so now I will show you how this exception happens. So ideally the scenario here is that as per the expectation, it has to enter the username, password. After it clicks on login, it's gonna click on type in, sorry, it's gonna type into the cache field. But now as the password is changed, I have given a wrong password. So once after it clicks on the login button, it will not enter into the application. Correct? So because of which it will not be able to find a text field to enter the cash in amount. So the exception would encounter here, right? The exception will be happening over here. And now I will show how this exception happens and how we will get to know why this error has happened and why this error has occurred. So let me just execute this workflow. So it is now entering the username and the password. Click on login button, but it will not be logging in because the password is wrong. And now it is trying to enter the cache in value, but now we have seen the error, right? So here if you see, these are the errors. So let's say for example you have any other next steps over here. First of all, it's gonna break the execution, right? Because it has encountered the error and we have not handled it, correct? So because of which it's gonna break the execution here. Let's say if I say continue, it has come out of the execution. And if you see runtime error, right? So if you see this is a source, as I've mentioned you, it's going to provide you the source message and what are the possible solutions. So what is the source of this? Source is basically where the error has happened, where the exception has encountered. So the exception has encountered here because the reason being it could not find this element. So why this element is not found? You can read these possible solutions. Basically ensure the application is open and UI element is visible. So if you read these solutions, it will be easy for you to troubleshoot what went wrong. So it says that the application, either the application is not open or the UI element might not be visible. So what are the possible chances that UI element is not visible? Because you are not on the screen, right? So why you are not on the screen? Because the login has failed, correct? So now what we can do in order to check this is, you might have seen in the UI automation demo, there is something called check app state, right? Or the element exists. You can do any of this. So if you see, it is also providing a possible solution. Use check state activity. So before you even try to enter the value onto the home page, you have to first check whether it is in the home page or not, right? So let's say you, before you do this type into, you keep one more activity called check state. It will identify whether you are in home page or not, correct? If you're not in home page, that means you can put a message box, or you can put a catch block saying that the login has failed. If you are in already in the home page, then you can go with the existing flow. So this is one way of handling the exceptions as well, because the whole point of exception handling is to smoothly exit the flow, instead of exiting the flow as as a hard exit, right? You have to smoothly or soft kill. You have do the automation even though when there is an application exception or in case of business exception. Okay, so now let's see how do we handle this. So before I tell you how do we handle this, I also wanted to talk about some business exceptions, and then I'll come back and I'll show you how we handle the application exceptions. Okay, so because we will be directly going into a different concept, which is try catch mechanism. So before I do that, I wanted to talk about business exceptions as well. Okay, so till now we have seen what are the application exceptions, right? So let's also see what are the different types of, first let's understand what are the business exceptions are, and how do we handle them, and how do we, in case of business exceptions, how do we use the exception handling mechanisms. So the first and the foremost thing, let's understand what are business rule exceptions. So as I told initially, business rules exceptions are basically the known exceptions. So let's say, for example, you've gone to an ATM, okay, and then you're trying to withdraw some cash. Let's say you have only, for example, 30,000 in your bank account, and you wanted to withdraw 50,000. So the balance is not available for you to withdraw 50,000. So it will throw an error. It will throw a message to you that insufficient balance or insufficient funds, right? So how does the system know to throw a certain message or let you know, this is insufficient funds? Because it has trained in certain way. It knows that there can be a possible scenario or situation when user tries to withdraw more than what's there. So it has been trained in such a way that it has to react with certain message. That is called business exception. So whatever the automation, the basic rule of automation is, whenever you're trying to automate something, there are certain rules that we design for automation. So let's say, for example, if there's a banking website or a banking application, so you're trying to open an account. So in such cases, when you're trying to open an account, so there are certain rules that you have to follow. You have to upload some documents, you have to provide some proofs, and you have to create or open an application. So in such cases, you have to fill in all the things. So let's say there are some mandatory fields which you have to provide in. So the system is trained in such a way that if any of the mandatory field is not there, it's going to throw an exception, and it's going to say that the whatever the fields that have been entered will not be saved, and there it will not be proceeding to create an application or to create a or to open a loan account or anything as such, right? So in such cases, these business rule exceptions will come in. So basically, this is about the scenarios which that may happen, and you train your bot to how to handle it in a smart way, right? So this is how the business rules differs from the system exceptions, and the business rules are something which we know already. These are the rules that we define. Okay, And now, firstly, as I have given some examples about what are the different types of business rule exceptions that we encounter and how we actually train them. So now let's get into in-depth concepts about this and see how we can handle them. So I'm going to show you a demo on this. So first of all, before we head into that, let me just explain you how we can handle this application exception as well. So firstly, there are different ways that we handle. First of all, I would like to show you how we can do the check app state as well. So there is something called check app state. I'm going to pull this over here. So this is going to work for any type of application exceptions. So basically when you're trying to log in, you can utilize this one. Okay. So firstly, I'm gonna first execute. In order to do this, let me just do one thing. First, I have to log in successfully. Only then I can show the home page. Let me log in once and then I'll capture the element over there. Okay, so it's gonna log in now. Okay, so now I am able to see the home page. Okay, so this is my home page. So how do I understand whether the application has come onto the home page? There are some of the pointers that are there. So the first thing is either I can go for the deposit transaction because I'm in the deposit page, or I can go any selector that's there in the withdrawal or split deposit, anything I can choose from. So my selector I wanted to select is cash in or deposit. So it can be anything, or I can go for transaction as well. But I would preferably go for cash in because I wanted my next step would be I will be entering the cash, right? So I want to ensure I'm in that page. So how I can do that? I'm gonna first minimize this. After login, I want to check if I am landed in the home page or not, right? So for that, I'm gonna indicate the element and I'm gonna indicate the cache in, right? Because that's my pointer to let me know that I'm in the deposits page because my next step would be to enter the cache, right? So I wanted to check if my robot is in this page or not. So I'm gonna confirm, right? So if it is there, right? So if that value is appearing, then I'm gonna put a message box saying, so message box is basically for us to understand, with a pop-up or the message that you are at the right stage or wrong stage, what went wrong and all. But during the production or, when you're actually publishing your project, message box is something which we will delete or we can replace it with log message. I'll show you how you can do that. So for time being, I'm going to use message box and then I'm going to mention, so if you see here, there are two branches for check app state. I'm going to show you here. For check app state, okay, there are two things. It's going to check the value, whether it's available or not. So there can be two possibilities. Yes, it's available or it's not. So if you see there are two branches, two different flows, the target appears or target does not appear. So in case if the target is available, if the target is appearing, so in such case, I'm going to enter the value. So it is in home page. Okay, right? That means login is successful. In such case, I'm going to enter the cache. Otherwise, I'm going to say that the login got failed. Okay, so this is a one way I'm gonna show you now. So let me just execute this. Before to that, I'm gonna close the application. Okay. So now it has entered username, password. So if you see, it is actually highlighting the elements that where it is clicking, where it is assessing, it's checking now. If you see, it is checking the cache and it has shown me the message box. If you're wondering or if you don't know how this is highlighting, I'm going to show you how it is happening. So this will help you even when you're developing something, even if you're creating an automation, while debugging, it will help you to understand what the which step is executing, what is the flow of the execution of your automation. Everything you will be easily able to trace, and at any point of time if certain element is not visible, you will also able to understand easily. I'm going to show you how. So if you see, this has highlighted in the green and then it's entering the value. So how I have got it done is inside the debug, I will also talk about the debugging, right? So where I will be showing all of this. But to make you understand this, there is something called highlight elements. So if you enable this one, whatever is happening here, right? Whatever is happening here, like each and every step, it's going, it's opening the application, it will highlight, it is entering the username, it will first highlight. And also if you observe, while it is checking for caching, it has highlighted the caching because it is checking for that particular element on the screen, right? So that's why it will highlight and it will show if that element is available. It, yes, in this case it is available because the login is successful and then it has come to this particular flow. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the password. I'm going to give a wrong password here and I'm going to show how this will be executing. So before do that, I'm going to close the whole the application and I'm going to execute this. So now if you see, it's highlighting, it has got it to the foreground as well, and it's entering username, password and logging in. And now if you see, it didn't go to the home screen and it is waiting for, before it fails, it waited for 5 seconds because we have changed the default timeout of this, right? So where I have changed it, inside the properties, I have kept the default timeout as, just give me a second. I think it's coming over here. So it has logged in, has failed. So this is how you can trace it. So you can either keep this way to understand what's happening, and I will also show you how you can keep it in the exception. Mm, is the timeout that I have provided. It's here. Let me just check in the project. Okay. Okay, so the timeout is here, but I believe we have given it as 5 seconds. Okay. So within 5 seconds, it's gonna throw an error, or it's gonna, basically if you do the check app state, it mostly will not throw the error because it's gonna give you two values, which is either true or false. So in this case, it's false because it could not log in into the application. And so it said login is failed. So this is one way. And now let's say you didn't keep a check app state and you directly wanted to write into caching. So in such case, how this works is something I'm going to show you. So I'm gonna first just delete this all things. Just give me a moment. I'm gonna have some water. Okay. So now I'm gonna put this cache in outside of this. Okay. I'm gonna take this off. And now let's see how do we handle this scenario. So this whole thing I'm gonna handle using a try catch block. So how do we do that? So this whole stuff I'm gonna you are right click and surround with try catch. Okay. So if you see this, so what basically this try catch is, it's there are actually a lot of versions or the scenarios within this try catch. I'm going to explain you one by one now. So first of all, whatever the code that you have, so if you wanted to handle the exceptions, whatever happens within that piece of code, you have to just do one thing. You just right click this and you can see there is something called surround with try catch. You just have to click that, which will help you to handle all the exceptions that comes in within this block of workflow. Okay. So now when whatever, so let's say for example in this case, for me, I will expect an error at this point, right? Because I have not given any check app state, nothing. So if the login is unsuccessful, if it is a failed, so in such case, this will not execute. But I wanted to know at every point of time what has happened, right? And it has to be smooth end, right? So I believe you all know about RE framework, which has a very good exception handling. So what I actually mean by smooth end or a soft execution is, so let's say you have inside RE framework, for example, you have initialization state, you have get transaction state, and you have process. So let's say you have process state where there is a exception that encountered. So if you don't handle it in a smooth way, the process execution will stop wherever the error has happened. It will not come to the end state, right? So but still, if you are having a proper exception handling, it will smoothly come out of that workflow and it will end the execution. Okay. So now there are different ways of how do you handle certain type of exceptions. Either you want that exception to be suppressed, or that exception, because let's say for example the login has failed, you don't want it to be going to the process, right? You definitely want to end the execution there, because there is no point of going to the process and then failing over there, because anyways it will not be executing anything in the process because the login itself has failed. So in such cases, the exception handling, the way that we handle the exceptions is different. So let's say, for example, you have a process XAML where you're doing a transactional wise approach. Let's say for second transaction, if there is any exception, you don't want to end the execution, but you want to you wanted to only handle that second transaction, but you want the process to pick up the third one and execute. Correct. So these are the different ways of handling the exceptions, which I will be telling you now. I have one more example for you to show how these exceptions can be handled in a proper way. So one transaction's error or one transaction's behavior will not affect the next one, but the execution will happen smooth way. So now I'm going to tell you. First, let's talk about the login workflow, which we were seeing from the beginning. So now I'm going to tell you how we will handle this error. So let's say now I don't want my execution to go further in case if there's a login, because the login is an beginning stage. If it is failing, there is no point going inside the application and doing anything over there. So now I'm going to tell you how we will handle this error. So the whole block, as I told you, we have to put it inside the try. So if you see, I have kept everything inside the try block. And now whatever happens, right? So if you see, whatever happens within the try block, if there is any exceptions, that has to be handled, or that has to be shown at least in the catch block. So if you see, I have clicked on add catch block, and then I am adding one type of exception. So let's say for example, here I would say system.exception. So if you see, observe here, null reference exception, argument exception, or IO we have not discussed in the slide, but null reference and argument we have discussed in the slide. So these are all the different categories within the exception family, right? So let's say for whatever type you are encountering, that can be captured under system.exception. So you can select either specific exception type if you know specifically what type of exception it is, or if you don't know, you can just keep it as system.exception, because that contains all different types of system exceptions, all different types of application exceptions. So everything will fall under system.exceptions. So you can define what type of exception it is. And now here comes the major thing. So there are two ways of handling it. So the first way is, either you can suppress the exception here. How do you suppress the exception is one thing, or you can throw the exception out of this block. Okay, so now it's a catch block, right? So now let's say, for example, I am gonna use a log message. Okay, so I'm going to use a log message. So what does it actually does is the log message will suppress the exception. That means it will just execute the catch block and it will not end the execution. So how does it happen? How does it works? I'm going to show you now. So let's say, for example, it says system.exception. I'm gonna Okay, so I have told you in the beginning of the session, how do we understand or how do we get to know the type of, the actual reason for the exception is by using the exception variable. So if you see here, I have used system.exception, correct? So now I'm gonna show you how do we use this variable. So if you see, there is a variable called exception, right? So I'm gonna for this variable, I'm going to use a message. So it will help me understand what is the reason, what is the actual reason for this exception. And what is the other thing that I've told you? Where the exception has happened. So how do we understand where the exception has happened? I'm going to concatenate it with the source called exception.source. So these are two methods or two functions that you need to know to understand, first of all, why the exception happened and where the exception has happened. This will definitely help you to figure out the error, the exception reason during the runtime. Okay, now I'm going to save this and let's execute and see what happens. And after which I'm going to talk about finally block. Okay. Okay, so it's trying to enter username, password, and clicking on login. Okay. So now it has waited for certain time and it's gonna throw the error. So now I'm gonna click on continue. So if you see, it has smoothly ended the execution. So how? Because I have suppressed this execution, suppressed this error. So how I have suppressed this error is something we can see over here. So now if you see, let me go back to, okay, so I'm gonna put a breakpoint here for all of you. So I will show you what happened here. Okay, so if you see, you can even read this log message to make you understand. So firstly, if you see over here, there is something called the whole message. Okay, so you can see this is the whole error message and you can see that is a source. This is the value that I've given. So what is the source? This is a source, right? So at this particular activities, this exception has encountered. So now I'm gonna show you with a breakpoint. As I talk about more debugging as well, you will understand how I kept the breakpoint and everything. So basically, to give you an overview of it, so whenever you are trying to, run an execution to understand step by step, you can go through this panel actually over here. I'll tell about the debugging first because we are doing it right now. So if you see over here, if you want to understand at every point of time which step is being executed, I told you can keep a highlight element, right? And also there's called as execution trail, which you can keep so that it's going to show you which one got executed and it's going to check, okay, the trail and everything you're going to see. And there is something called breakpoint. So basically, whenever you're trying to execute something, you can keep a breakpoint where it will break or it will stop the execution, and basically it will pause the execution and it will ask or it will give the control for you to manage how it will be happening. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I have kept a breakpoint over here, so the execution will come till here and it will be the control will be given to me, so I will understand where the flow is. So now I'm going to debug this. I'm going to click on debug file And I believe you know about the slow step. So we have actually three different speeds, like 1 to 4, three different speeds are there. So if you based on the speed that you set, it's going to execute with the same speed. So now the execution will be failed because it cannot find the caching. And now if you see, I'm going to click on continue. So after I clicked on continue, as there is an exception. So what type of exception it is? It's a system exception, right? Because it is trying to find an element which is not available on the screen. So that's why it's a system exception. So because it has encountered a system exception, it has come to the catch block. As I told you, the try block will contain all the execution, all the workflow that you wanted to execute. So at any point of time, if there is any error in the try block, it's going to throw that exception. So from that point, it will not execute, right? So it will be coming to the catch block. So the catch block is something which will handle this exception. So as I told you here, with a log message, I'm actually suppressing the exception. Okay. So now if you see, I am going to suppress this. I'm going to click on type in step into. So basically step into, step over, step out. These are the controls that will be provided to us. Once after we keep the breakpoint, you can click on step into, which will take you to the next steps. Okay. Okay. So now it has executed and it's coming out of the workflow, right? So it has executed the catch block. So now I'm going to talk about the finally block as well. But before to that, I'm also wanted to talk about throw and rethrow. Okay. So throw and rethrow will actually affect the functionality of finally. So how it will be affected is something I'm going to show now. So now, first of all, I'm going to use a log message within the finally block. Okay. So within the final block, I'm going to use log message, and I'm just keeping a standard text like this is finally block. This is very important to understand. This can also be an interview question if you're trying to apply for any job. Exception handling is first and foremost an important concept, and most probably there will be questions like basically the scenario based questions. Like when the finally block will be executed in certain scenarios, if a throw is placed or if a rethrow is placed, how the output will be or something like that. They may give you a XAML and they may ask you, like, in such kind of scenarios, which block will be executed and why. So these kind of scenarios will be there. If there are questions around exception handling, definitely there will be questions on exception handling, because if you're trying to build any type of project or automation, for sure you need to have a good hands-on or experience or knowledge on exception handling. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about the finally block. So in this scenario, first I will execute this particular scenario. So the scenario is something like this. You have a try block where there is a possible scenario for system exception, right? So what happens in case if there's a system exception in try block, it will be coming to the catch block because we already have something for handling the system exceptions. Okay. So it will come to the catch block. It will execute this, and then the question can be something like this: will it execute the finally block or not? Okay, so in this scenario, you can put it in the chat as well. What do you think about it? So will it execute finally or not in case if there's an exception in the try block? Yes or no? You can maybe take a second to think about it and you can put it in the chat. Let me take a look as well. You can say yes or no in the chat. What do you think in this scenario? So I'm going to tell the scenario once again. Let's put it in the chat, yes or no. So firstly, there is the try block that contains the piece of code which has a possible exception scenario, and that can be handled in the catch block. That means using a log message. And what do you think? Will the block in the finally will be executed or not? Yes or no? Okay. So the majority says yes. So let's execute and see what happens in this scenario. Okay, it has entered username, password. Okay, so now let's wait for the error. Okay, we've got the error, and then I'm gonna continue the exception. So now it has come into the catch block, and then I'm clicking on continue. Okay, so let's see what is the output. So here we can say this is finally blocked. Perfect. So you all have guessed it right. I think most of you, yes, as you have handled it in catch. Correct. So as I've handled it in catch, so basically I handled and I also suppressed this error in catch block, because if you see, handling can be done in different ways. The one that I've done here in the catch block is suppressing the error. Okay, so I have not thrown it out, or I have not rethrown it, right? So that's why the finally block has executed. So there can be one more scenario or one more interview question where the finally block will not be executed. So let's say, for example, I'm going to throw this error. Okay. So whatever the error that's coming into the catch block, okay, I'm going to throw this particular error. Okay. So basically, I'm going to rethrow this error. Let me show you that. Okay, we've caught the error that's there, and I'm going to rethrow this error. So in this case, what happens? So let me just debug this and show you what will happen in this scenario. Will the finally block be executed or not? So meanwhile, you can give your guesses as well. So this scenario will be most important. Yeah, I'll explain clearly about it with the scenarios as well. Okay, so here if you see, I have executed this catch block. Okay, so now I'm gonna rethrow this, right? So if you see, I'm gonna rethrow this. So if you observe, this has come out of the block, and if you see here, it has not entered the finally block. So you can see over here, this is the workflow, and it contains the source. It does not give any log message or anything about the block that we have kept in the finally. So basically, if you see, before I kept the rethrow, it has given me this is finally block log message. But here, if you see, I have rethrown it from here, right? So it has not given me that message in the error. So if you just observe here, so let's take the log message one by one, because this will be your step to understand how the execution is happening, how the flow is, going step by step. So first of all, you can see here, this is the main error. So this is the first error that we've encountered. And the second one is the log message. So this you can identify with this source, right? So this is the log message which we have kept in order to understand how the catch block has captured the error and how it has logged the values over there. And later, if you see, I have rethrown it, right? I have rethrown it and the execution has ended. And if you see here, this is a different one, node not found. I'll tell you why this has come. When you're rethrowing the error, there should be something to catch. If you see, this workflow itself is a module. So let's say, for example, whenever you're working in a complete project, you will not do a rethrow from here. Okay, even though if you're doing a rethrow, you will keep a one more module. So basically, what I mean by rethrow is you are throwing again the error to a parent block. Okay, so that there will be something to catch and suppress it. Okay, so have you worked on RE framework? If so, you will be able to understand this concept even more clearly, because in RE framework, what all the the modules that you have within the state machine have this throw rethrow concept. So I'm going to show you that how this works. So first of all, inside the main, I'm going to put all these blocks which we are seeing over here inside the main workflow, so that you will get a clear picture of how we are handling this. Okay, but I just want you to understand for the moment, to see how we are handling the exceptions and which block is executing when you are keeping a code in the try which may possibly give an exception, and how it will be handled in the catch. If you suppress the exception, how the finally block is seen. If you rethrow the exception, how the finally block will not be executed. Okay, so let's say in a case where you wanted to you know, close all the applications before you go to the next automation or next transactions. So in such cases you can keep the catch block by just suppressing the exception, and in the finally block you can close all the applications, so that you know, whenever, even though there's an exception or when there's no exception, the finally block will be executed. But let's say you don't want to close the applications, you just want to kill everything just by rethrowing it. You can just rethrow and the kill will be handled in the overall main block. So now I'm going to show you how that will be handled. So let's say, for example, I'm going to surround this whole try catch within a try catch one more time. Okay. So now if you see, this is a nested one. I want you to pay more attention to understand this more clearly, because I wanted to explain you the scenario of rethrow. Okay. So rethrow is very much important because I'm throwing it outside. I want something to handle this. Correct. So if you see, I'm rethrowing this and I will put a catch block here, and I'm gonna add a log message like, this is a parent catch block. So now in such cases, whatever is rethrown from there will be handled in the catch block. So this is how your RE framework is built. So you are throwing something from your child flow. If you're rethrowing something, there should be something to catch. Otherwise, it will also end up in an exception, right? So if you're rethrowing and there is nothing to catch, it will also fall into an exception. So now I'm just going to execute this and show you in this case how the execution will be ended smoothly. So previously when you have seen the error, that is because the rethrow is not handled properly. So now I will show you how this will be different from the other one. I will explain this whole concept once again because it will be little confusing for you. Because the way exceptions are built, that needs to be handled properly, right? So now there is an exception in the caching. Okay. So now if you see, we are putting a long message over here and then we are rethrowing it. Perfect. So if you see, last time without a main try catch, without a parent try catch, we have got an error message popped up on the screen. That's because the error that we've got in the try, we are rethrowing it and we are not handling it. So if you see here, this is a finally block and this is a parent catch block. So if you see, just give me a moment, sorry. Sorry for that. I'm having cough actually. So now if you see here, the one that we are throwing, right, we are rethrowing it from here. So we can also do one thing. We can put a breakpoint to understand it better, which will help our understanding even more better when we keep a breakpoint and try to understand the steps it's executing, right? So meanwhile, I want you guys to take a guess on which block will be executed. Okay, so now we've got the error, and if you see here, okay, so now I'm handling this error and then I'm rethrowing it. So if you see, once after you rethrow, it's gonna capture the error. It has executed the finally block. So this is what I was trying to put it. Like earlier when we have executed that, it has not executed this, and also it has given a node error because there is no another parent catch block to handle that exception, right? Which is very most important to understand. And now if you see, these both blocks have got executed. So this is how you can use this. And when we see the business rule exception, you will even more understand it clearly, because business rule exceptions also something which we will be seeing over here in the main demo. Okay, so now let me just show you the business exceptions. So now, for example, so let's say we have seen a criteria where in an ATM, if you're trying to actually get or withdraw an amount which is exceeding your balance, right? So in such cases, we have seen that there will be an insufficient funds error or something as such, right? So in such case, so let's say now I will, while I was showing the business rule exception, I will also explain you how we can understand what is the value that is flowing through, right? The debugging part. So when you're debugging, it's very very important to understand different types of panels that we have. Okay, so now I'm going to show you all the different panels that we have, and in case of business exception, how this will be working and functioning as well. So first I'll explain you what is a business rule exception that we are trying to look over here. So first and foremost, I'm gonna put it up this way. So the login module will be as it is, will be the same. So let me just give the right password to show you the proper login. Okay. And in the main workflow, what actually I'm doing here is I'm having an Excel file. Okay, let me open the Excel file for you. So it's my yeah. So this Excel file contains some information about the cash in, cash out, and the month. Okay. So here, what I'm exactly doing is, me open the workflow. So whenever I'm reading the Excel file, I'm just checking something over here like a condition. Okay. So after I read the whole Excel file, I'm logging into the application and I am checking if the value of that cash in is greater than 100 or not. If it's greater than 100, then I'm creating a business rule exception. So here I want you to pay a little attention. As I told you, that business rule exceptions or something which we define, right? So we already know that this scenario may happen. So in such cases, we will write the custom message. But unlike the exceptions that we are facing with the system exceptions, which will be usually the actual message, but for business rule exceptions, the message that we are writing is something which we write in a language that we understand, because this is a certain scenario that has happened, right? So if you say the values are out of the range 100, because if you see, we are validating the particular row value which is greater than 100. If it's greater than 100, the business rule exception will be out of range, correct? So now I'm going to show you how we will handle this. So it's quite simple and similar to how we have done the system exception. But here, if you are encountering any business rule exception, we will throw it. Okay, we are going to throw the business rule exception and we are going to write, this is a syntax. So you have to use new business rule exception, and within that braces, you have to write the message. Okay, so instead of the message that we're capturing like in system exceptions, we will only create that particular value. And here is the catch block. Within that try block, we have a catch block where we will be entering, or whatever the logs that we wanted to have, we will be providing it over here. So I'll quickly show you how we can debug as well, because that's also one of the concept that I wanted to cover. Inside the debug, we have multiple panels while debugging, so I'm going to show you that as well now. So now if I just put a maybe a breakpoint here, so I will show you each and every step, how we can understand which value is picked up and what is the value, or what is the at the runtime, what is the value inside that particular row. So firstly, I'm gonna show you till here. Okay, let me also put I'll just clean this up for now, because we don't have any system exceptions as such. So let me clean up this whole thing. Okay, perfect. Because I just created it to show the system exception. So this, what we are doing in this main workflow is we are first reading that Excel, okay, and then we are logging into the application, and we are reading through, looping through each and every value within this Excel. If the value is greater than 100, so in this case we have two values which are greater than 100. So this scenario which I wanted to explain is if there is an exception, right? So this is an exception for me. So the second line should not affect the execution of third line, or else let's say this is only 11, okay. So this is an exceptional scenario where the user cache in is 250, which is greater than 100, but it should not affect or it should not break the execution of the next two, which are actually correct scenarios, right? So how do we handle this is something I'm going to show you. So these values, okay, let me save this. These values should not affect the execution of the next ones. So let me just execute this workflow, and parallelly I'm going to show you how we will debug this. I'm going to debug this. I think somebody is annotating on the screen. It'll be great if you can clear it off. um, okay. Can you clear? Yeah, thanks for clearing it off. Okay, so now I'm gonna execute this. I've executed this workflow. So now I'm gonna show you. If you see on the left hand side, whenever you're debugging something, you will have something called immediate, and there are other panels called locals and watch. Okay, so I'm gonna show you how you can understand what is the value at each and every point of time. So now let's say I'm gonna show the locals. Okay, so you can see over here the DT information, right? So you can see the information that is within this particular data table, right? So it has read from the Excel, and these are all the values within that data table. Okay. So we can also see various information, right? So it has read all the details and it has stored it, and if you wanted to see anything or if you wanted to search for something, you can search it in the immediate panel as well, right? So this is how, let's say if you wanted to get the value of this row count, you can just get it from here. So the debugging, in the debugging locals and immediate panels will really help you when you wanted to debug and understand if there are any programmatic errors, which we have seen at the beginning of the session, right? So at any point of time, if you want to understand if something is going wrong or if something is not entered properly in your application, if you wanted to understand what is the actual reason or the error, so in such cases you can utilize these two panels like locals and immediate, which will happen or which can be seen in the debug mode. Okay, so for that, what you have to do, you have to put a breakpoint and you have to understand by debugging through these panels. These panels will help you to understand how you can actually understand the values, or at every point of time, at every step, what is the value of that particular variable can be easily identified through these panels. Okay, so this will help you to identify. So now I'm going to show you after the login what is the value of the row at each and every time, because that's what our interest is, right? So I'm going to log in into the application. Okay, so we have seen the try catch and rethrow finally as well. So now I'm going to show you how we can use the throw now in this use case. So for example, let's say it has now the breakpoint is here, right? So I'm going to continue it, and it has come inside over this. So here I wanted to show you what is the value of the row. Okay, so I'm going to go to the immediate panel, and I'm going to search for this value. So it's going to give me at the runtime. That means you're looping through for each row inside this data table, right? So at the moment, the data row value is this one. Right? This is the value. And let's say, for example, you wanted to understand the value of the cache-in, right? So how do you know? You have to, the cache-in is the column, right? Either you can put row of cache-in if you know the value, the cache-in column exactly. Otherwise, you can give it 1 because it starts from 0 index. right? So if you see 15, so what is our condition? If this value is greater than 100, then you're throwing the business exception. But now the value is 15, which is less than 100. So it will be going into the else block and it's gonna add it into the cache in, cache out. So now let's see. It's gonna go into the workflow to execute and it's going to provide cache in and it's gonna click the accept. And if you see now, it has come and stopped here because we have a breakpoint. So now let's use the same command to understand what is the value of the next row. It's 250, which is greater than 100, right? So in such cases, what are we going to do? What are we going to check over here? So now as per our execution, as per our condition that we've provided here, it has to throw the exception, right? So now I'm gonna click on step into and it is throwing the exception, right? So if you see, this is the value, this is the customized value that we have provided. But if you see in case of system exceptions, we don't have this value, right? So we have the value that has generated during the runtime and the value that it has encountered at the time of the system exception. So we have captured the value using the syntax called exception dot message. But here in this case, this is a customized value that we have provided because we know what is the different an exception or the different scenario because of which the exception has occurred, right? So now I'm going to throw this and then here after, okay, so now if you see here, maybe I want you to answer. So why it has come into the catch block? Can anybody answer by seeing the flow over here? So I have thrown the exception. Why it has come into the catch block? Can anybody tell me in the chat or you can answer in the chat? Correct. We have thrown it and it has because the exception throw out and was caught. Correct. So if you see here in the previous in the system exception, we have not thrown it, but it has come into a catch block. Why? What is the difference? Can you able to figure out what is the difference in the with respect to the one that is there in the system exception and in the business exception? Can somebody tell me the difference? If not, I'll help you out, but you can give a try. Can somebody able to figure out what is the difference? So if you see in case of system exception, we have not thrown it. But however, whenever there's an exception, it has come to the catch block. But here we are throwing it. So it has come to the catch block. So what is the difference that we have figured out between the system exception and the business exception? Why didn't we use this throw in the system exception as well? Correct. Abhi is actually correct, partially. Correct. Ajay is also right. So both together are right. To combine both of the answers, I wanted to make a definition over here, as we have already seen system exceptions or an unknown exceptions. So if we don't know, there is no possibility of throwing it. So that's perfect. And there's also one more perspective because this catch was meant. Yes, this is also a very good observation. If you see here, inside the catch block, we are using core.business rule exception, right? So that's why whatever the business rule exception. So if you see here, here we've mentioned business rule exception. So that's why it has come into this. So let's say, for example, if I've created one more catch block and if I've created a system exception, it will not fall into that category. It will still go inside this because the system exception will be different from the business rule exception, and when we are throwing it, we have thrown a business rule exception, right? So both are right perspectives, and actually that is the actual definition of business and the system rule exceptions. Because when you know like what type of exception or what scenario happens or occurs, we are going to throw them, right? So that's how we use the throw. And I think somebody was asking about the difference between throw and rethrow, right? So when you are encountering a business rule exception, you know that what scenario is going to happen and how you have to handle. So in such cases, you will use the throw. Okay, so I have paused that question to answer it over here, because to explain that I need to make you understand what is business rule exception, right? So this is a scenario where we actually use the throw, right? So whenever there is a business rule exception, we know in certain scenarios the business rule exception will happen and we are going to throw them, right? So the way of handling that in the catch can be two different ways. Either you can rethrow it from there, correct? If you rethrow, what will happen? It will capture the same message and it will rethrow into the parent block, correct? If I also want to ask one more question. If there is no parent block and if you are rethrowing it, what will happen? If there is no parent block and if you are rethrowing it, what is going to happen? Correct. Correct. Perfect. Everybody's right. So it's gonna throw an error, because there, if you're throwing or rethrowing anything, there should be a catch block to handle. Correct. Otherwise, it's gonna throw an error and it's gonna stop abruptly. That is also a wrong way of handling the exceptions. And now, as we know that this particular error comes, we are throwing it. And if you see in the catch block, I'm suppressing the error. Because why I'm suppressing the error? As I told you initially, that this is a business rule exception first thing, and if anything is running on this or anything is encountering this particular scenario, should not execute the next transactions that are occurring. So what are my next transactions? Let me just continue and show you that. So if you see, it has come to the next transaction, next row. So if you see, I'm in the debug panel, I'm checking what is the value of that. It is 77. So let's say, for example, if in my catch block I don't handle it, right? So what happens? The execution will stop here. None of them after the exception will be executed. But I want, irrespective of the values or the records that are greater than 100, I want them to execute next one, right? So in such cases, what happens? It will go and perform the execution for the next record. So let me just continue this. Perfect. So this is how in RE framework also you can continue with the next ones irrespective of one failed transaction, right? So the one that failed with the business exception, it's a true one, but still it's a scenario which get failed. Okay. So now it's going to go for the next one. Let me continue. Now I'll just ask maybe quick questions, maybe in 1 minute, because we are already running out of time, to just make you just want to understand whether you understood the concept clearly or not. So first of all, okay, less than 100 should be fine, should be processed, correct? So okay, so now I just wanted to understand in which scenarios you will use throw. Maybe you can just tell business exception or application exception, in which case you will use throw. Anybody can answer? Yeah, in case of known exception, which are business exceptions. Perfect. So, in which cases you will use a rethrow? In which cases you can use a rethrow? I can see somebody has unmuted. We will close it quickly, maybe in a minute. But I just wanted to summarize the whole concept which we have seen. Okay, so let me just put it up this way. First of all, whatever the execution or the workflow that we have, we will put it in the try block. In case of known exceptions, we are going to handle them by throwing the exceptions, which we will handle in the catch block. Okay. And in case of unknown exception, we are not going to throw them. But at any point of time in the try block, if there is an unknown exception, it's going to come to the catch block if there is a system exception block, right? So there are two types, system exception block and the business exception block. So as per the type of the exception, the catch block will be picked up. Okay. And in order to handle the exceptions, you can do it in multiple ways. The exceptions that are caught in the catch block, either you can rethrow them to the parent block, Otherwise, you can suppress them. It depends on the scenario, how you want to function it. So in this case, first scenario, when I am doing the login, I have rethrown it. Why? Because if there is a login failure, I don't want to go to the next steps. So I have rethrown that so that my execution will be stopped there. But in case of transactional workflows, I don't want to rethrow that. I still want to proceed with the execution irrespective of one failure because that's a business exception. So in such cases, what I have done, I have suppressed that execution. I have suppressed that exception only for the transaction, and I have proceeded with the next step. Okay, is this clear how in which cases we will use throw, in which cases we will rethrow, and in which cases we will suppress the execution? This is very important to understand when to use what. Okay, is that clear to everybody? In very crucial stage, we use rethrow. So Shazab, I think so Shazab, to answer your question, if you say very crucial stage, I would give you one example. So let's say the login example which we have seen throughout the session. So in a case where even suppressing the execution will not help you. For example, you suppress the execution at the login, and if your next step is to enter the values into the application, so even if you suppress that execution, suppress that exception, the next step will be a failure, right? So in such cases, you rethrow and end the execution smoothly. Okay. But in case if you want to proceed further, for example, in the case of transactions, right? So you don't want to stop the execution, you can smoothly suppress that particular transaction or the exception, and then you can proceed with the next one. Okay. Which cases? I think I can see most of the questions are answered in the chat. If you have any questions, you can also unmute yourself and you can ask. Where would we normally put the exception handling in the main flow? Okay, so in the main flow, Venti, I believe. So Venti, actually in the main flow, if you see the whole block has to whole except workflow, you can put it in the try catch, because whatever you are doing within the main workflow has to be handled or processed smoothly. So you can have something like, instead of a one try catch, you can have like a parent and the child. So in any of the project that you're working with, you will have modules or XAMLs, right? So all the XAMLs can be put together in one parent try catch, and individual XAMLs can be having individual try catches, so that whatever is happening within the workflow can be handled individually, and everything can be handled within the parent try catch. So in such way you can customize your workflow. Okay. I hope it's clear for you. So basically we have to play with the scenarios, and based on the based on the way that you wanted to handle the exception, you have to handle it. Either you want to suppress the exception or you want to throw and end the execution. It depends on the scenario that you wanted to go ahead with. Okay. um okay, so that's all from my side. I hope I've made this concept clear for you. If you have any questions, you can even unmute yourself and you can ask.
Great job, Harika. This is a amazing questions in the chat too. I'm not sure if any weren't answered. Jeffrey or Mason,
Yes,
did you
they
get
have
everything?
answered. Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe most of the questions are answered. I can see all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I believe so.
Okay.
One of the questions I think that was asked, Eureka, is if you could share the workflow files, which,
Sure.
yeah,
Yes.
okay.
I will be handing over them to Revati. So she will be uploading all of them on the event page along with the PPT. So you can actually get them from the recordings as well. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
So,
Okay, so well, thank you everybody for joining today. Don't forget to register for our session next Monday. And then don't forget also to look and do your self-paced lessons and try to catch up on those. All right. Thank you guys for hosting this session today and appreciate you guys being here. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining in and amazing interaction. So yeah, you can even follow me on my LinkedIn as well. And I also have my YouTube channel where I keep posting on regular basis. You can even subscribe to my channel. I'm keeping my LinkedIn over here. You can even follow me. And if you have any questions later on, you can even reach out to me on my DM. Thank you so much.
Thank you.